Hello and welcome to DSW's Endpoint Assessment for the Level 3 Mortgage Advisor Standard. My name's Isobel, I'm a product owner at DSW and I'll be talking you through this standard today. This recording is designed to give you an overview of what will happen during endpoint assessment, what to expect, when it will take place, but also how apprentices can prepare and what support is available. By the end of this, you should have a clear understanding of how the process will work and what the requirements are. And of course, if there are any questions or anything you need more information on, we'll show you where to go for additional support at the end of the recording. Today we'll be discussing what the endpoint assessment process looks like, how and when it will be delivered, what happens during the assessment itself, and we'll go into more detail about the Mortgage Advisor Standard, how each assessment method works, and how it will be graded. What is endpoint assessment? This is what we call the series of assessments an apprentice must take to prove they're able to do the job for which they've been training. These take place once the on-programme period is complete and the apprentice is deemed ready for endpoint assessment. The endpoint assessment focuses on the apprentice proving their competence through the work they've done and forms 100% of the assessment of this apprenticeship. Assessment design and delivery. DSW create assessment materials in line with robust design principles that are recognised by Ofqual. These principles are validity, reliability and comparability, manageability and minimising bias. This means you can be assured that our assessments are appropriate for the standard, that everyone will get the same experience, the assessments will be consistent and fair, and that everyone will have a chance to succeed. When does endpoint assessment happen? Endpoint assessment begins when the on-programme phase has been completed, required functional skills have been achieved, required professional qualification has been achieved, and the employer and apprenticeship training provider agree that the apprentice is competent. This next stage is called Gateway, and it's when the apprentice begins preparing for the endpoint assessment process. What happens during endpoint assessment? Once the apprentice has met the Gateway criteria, DSW, in conjunction with the apprenticeship training provider, employer and apprentice, will schedule dates for each assessment to take place. It should typically take no more than 3 months to complete this final assessment. The apprentice completes the assessments detailed in the assessment plan. There is still an expectation that the apprenticeship training provider will support the apprentice throughout the endpoint assessment period. This is to ensure that they're familiar with what's to come and so mock exams can be completed with them. In order to pass and be deemed competent, the apprentice must pass all of the assessments. Here we have an overview of the assessment methods used for the Mortgage Advisor Standard. It's made up of 3 components. We have a video recorded role-play scenario, a portfolio of evidence, and a 60-minute reflective discussion. We'll look at each method in a bit more detail now. Video recorded role-play. The role-play scenario is a simulated activity designed to observe the apprentice assisting a client exactly how they would in their role. The apprentice will be assessed against the knowledge, skills and behaviours from across the Mortgage Advisor Standard. In the toolkit, you'll find a document providing an introduction and guidance on how the role-play should be conducted. The client in the scenario will be role-played by a third party with sufficient knowledge of the mortgage sales process to ensure that the scenario description is fully and competently performed. For example, this could be a mortgage administrator or another related role within a firm or an external person supplied by the training provider. The training provider will be responsible for ensuring that the individual is appropriate and that the role is performed competently to the standard required. Although we do not stipulate which learning outcomes should be covered within the role-play, it must cover at least 50% of the learning outcomes. At the planning meeting, the apprenticeship training provider and endpoint assessor will agree a date for the role-play to take place and a date for it to be assessed. The live documentation will be sent to the apprenticeship training provider 24 hours prior to the role-play taking place. Due to the varying nature of the mortgage advisor role, DSW do not stipulate how long the role-play should last. Mock role-play scenarios are available in the toolkit. Following assessment of the role-play, the apprentice will be advised via the assessment record which learning outcomes have not been met. These will need to be evidenced via the portfolio and reflective discussion. Portfolio of evidence. In the portfolio, we're looking for a blend of evidence collected both during the on-programme phase and after Gateway has been achieved. You can either upload your portfolio to EPA Pro as a zip folder, or you can provide us with a link to your ePortfolio platform. It's really important that the apprentice puts in as much as they can into the portfolio in terms of demonstrating their competence with their best pieces of evidence. This will allow us to explore further and relate to specific pieces of evidence to discuss in the reflective discussion. In the portfolio, they will need to demonstrate how they've applied the knowledge, skills and behaviours of the standard, and it should contain real work tasks that they've completed. They should provide evidence for a minimum of 23 learning outcomes, including any not evidenced through the role play. We provide a referencing table in the toolkit so the apprentice can map the evidence in their portfolio to the relevant pass and distinction descriptors. The toolkit also contains guidance on what types of evidence can be included in the portfolio and guidance on how to ensure that evidence is sufficient, authentic, relevant and current. In order for the apprentice to progress to the reflective discussion, a minimum of 16 of the 23 learning outcomes must be met at a pass or above within the portfolio. The assessment record will indicate which learning outcomes are going to be picked up in the discussion to allow the apprentice to prepare accordingly. Context statement. When we refer to a context statement, we want to know what the apprentice has done in a specific situation: who, what, where, why, when. Build a picture behind a specific situation, and from there they can pull on pieces of product and performance evidence which demonstrate exactly what they've done in relation to their context statement. It's a great way for apprentices to bring all of their evidence together and give a more rounded picture of what they're capable of. They do need to make sure they corroborate what they've said in their context statement with product or performance evidence, as the context statement is purely anecdotal. Evidence types. We do not specify a minimum or maximum in terms of pieces of evidence to be included in the portfolio. Some pieces of evidence may cover several learning outcomes, and there may be some learning outcomes which require more than one piece of evidence in order to meet them in full. The focus should be on quality rather than quantity, ensuring that the apprentice has the best chance of meeting the required learning outcomes. The best portfolios contain a blend of different types of evidence. The next slide will list a few types of evidence they might like to include. Types of evidence. As you can see, there's a wide range of evidence types, and this list is not exhaustive. We do ask that videos and recordings are a maximum of 2 hours within the portfolio, and they will need to be time-stamped in the referencing table so the assessor knows which part of the recording they're referring to. The type of evidence you choose may be different to this list, which is absolutely fine as long as it's meeting those outcomes. Reflective discussion. The reflective discussion will be in the form of a structured discussion between the apprentice and the endpoint assessor. The aim of the discussion is to explore the content of the portfolio and the learner journey in more detail. The apprentice will have the opportunity to show how they compiled their portfolio in more detail and the learning they've undertaken since being on their apprenticeship. The purpose of the discussion is to clarify any questions the endpoint assessor has about the evidence presented in the portfolio, evidence any aspects of the standard that are not already evidenced in the portfolio through discussion of how they perform their role, discuss how they've progressed in their role, what they've done, and their approach to work. The discussion will need to take place in a suitable environment free from interruption. It will last for 60 minutes and be made up of 13 questions. The discussion will be completed remotely using technology that allows the apprentice to see and speak to the endpoint assessor. The training provider will need to ensure the apprentice is given support so they're comfortable with the technology and environment ahead of the interview. The apprentice will also need to come prepared with valid photo ID to show and present to the assessor, and they may bring notes into the discussion for reference. Grading. There are 3 levels of outcome for this standard: fail, pass, and distinction. Each learning outcome has its own descriptor on how to achieve a pass or a distinction. Where these are not evidenced at this level, it will be graded as a fail. The apprentice must achieve a minimum of 50% of the learning outcomes within the role play in order to progress to the next assessment method. In order for the apprentice to progress to the reflective discussion, a minimum of 16 learning outcomes must be met at a pass or a distinction in the portfolio. All learning outcomes must be met at a pass level via a combination of role play and portfolio evidence supported by reflective discussion in order to achieve a pass overall. In order to achieve a distinction, in addition to meeting the pass criteria, the apprentice must provide evidence of distinction differentiated performance in at least one learning outcome for each of the 16 competency areas in both the role-play and portfolio-based professional discussion in both on-programme and post-gateway evidence. The grading in this apprenticeship is cumulative, and the final grade depends on the outcome of all assessment methods. However, the apprentice must meet 50% of the learning outcomes at pass in role-play in order to progress to the portfolio assessment. Thank you for watching. We hope this has been helpful. As always, we're happy to help if you have any questions or need any more information, so please do get in touch. You can email us at info@dswapprenticeships.co.uk or give us a call on 01302 760 008. Thank you.